This is episode number 171 of the Mixology Talk podcast. And in this episode, and the one behind it, we're going to be tackling the same exact topic: how to deliver the color red to a cocktail. And you may ask, why would you have two separate podcasts on the exact same subject? And the answer is, we got two separate chefs, and they both had such great information on techniques and ingredients. And not only that, but we kind of took a little sidetrack on a couple other topics that I've been hearing a lot about recently, and they answered those questions as well. So it's not just about the color red, but a lot about just color in general and a couple really cool techniques. So I tried to weave them together NPR style. To be completely honest, I don't have the skills necessary to make it interesting. So I decided, why not just go ahead and release both of them, and I hope that you enjoy both. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Mixology Talk podcast. So this month we're focusing on colors, and in particularly February, we're going to be focusing on the color red. So one of the things I always say is, if you want to learn to be better at mixology and craft cocktails, the first person you should build a relationship with is a pastry chef. So I'm super excited to have a pastry chef on our podcast to talk about introducing colors, and most specifically the color red. So thank you for joining us, Chef Bella. I appreciate your time and your expertise, and thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, so like the wonderful world of becoming a pastry chef, what got you into it, excited about it? What got you into the whole restaurant scene?
Well, it's a little strange. I was originally a music major in college and discovered I liked cooking better than I liked playing the piano. So decided to kind of swerve and go to culinary school. One thing I did not like in school was pastry. I was very adamant against it. I said, there's no way they're going to rope me into this. It's just not going to happen. And then the internship I got was with a chef I wanted to work with, but the only opening was in the pastry department. So I learned to love it, and now I love it.
Wow, that's crazy. So kind of a roundabout way to get into pastries.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. That's kind of how I got into bartending, to be completely honest. I was I went to culinary school, dropped out, hated it. I think I lasted a semester, and I was like, I did it in Vegas.
Oh.
And, so I talked to a couple chefs out there, and I talked to, other people that have graduated. I'm like, what's the future look like once I get out of here? And they're like, you're going to be a line cook. I was like, yeah, probably not the best idea for me. So I became a craft dealer and then moved to California, and then became a bartender because I missed that environment of crafts, the high energy, the excitement. And I felt like bartending was kind of a nice place to be. And that's what got me into craft cocktails. Just kind of fell in love with it in a roundabout way as well. So that's really cool. Now, can you tell us a little bit about where you work at now and where you're located?
Sure. I am from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I'm currently working with a family bakery, working on a coffee shop concept. Been doing a lot of building from the ground up, making recipes, testing things, coming up with unique beverages, stuff like that. So
excellent. And I think the way we connected was on Reddit, and you were mentioning that you had been working on your seasonal menus coming up.
Yes.
So is there anything you're really, really excited coming up on your menus?
Kind of my thing with pastry and sweets in general is I like to have a balance of flavor. So something sweet, something savory, which I think is probably a little cliche at this point, but it's still my jam. So looking at uncaffeinated things like a spiced pear with cherry, like a sparkler kind of, cold brew with rosemary and grapefruit is another thing we're looking at. So
cold brew with rosemary. That sounds super good.
You should try nitro cold brew with gin sometime. That's also amazing. Unfortunately, we don't have a liquor license, but it was something we tried.
Well, you got to experiment, right?
Yeah,
Interesting. Oh, that's really cool. And it's funny that you mentioned that. I think in our group, we asked about some of the trends that are coming through in 2020 with craft cocktails, and coffee in general was one of the biggest focuses, like cold brew and all the different expressions of coffee. Everybody was really excited about. So cold brew and gin, I'm going to have to try as soon as we get off this podcast.
You'll have to report back. I think it's pretty great.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, I really do appreciate your time and you joining us on this podcast. And I think that one of the things that I've struggled with personally in creating like seasonal cocktails, especially with kind of a color focus like red, is sometimes they can be a little bit cliche. They could look a little bit pedestrian or a little too much like, if you look up Halloween cocktails, you're just like, oh my God, this is terrible. Or red cocktails, you're like, oh, this is so bad. So when you're looking at incorporating the color red, is there any specific avenues that your mind just kind of races to? Like, this is kind of where I would start and then kind of progress through maybe different ingredients or something like that.
So to the point you're talking about looking at drinks that are cliched red, a lot of shades and tones and depth of color can look that pedestrian kind of visual because it's just so red dye number 4, I guess. So if you can come to that color sort of in a more subtle way slightly, or maybe like less bright, a little bit more, towards like a duskier tone. So you still get the red. You're not just getting that bright cherry crayon red. That's probably what I would say would be the best way to approach it, as far as then you're not getting the cliche, vampiric blood red.
Red dye number 4.
Yep, red dye number 4.
Yeah, absolutely. And then as far as like ingredients that you would look to kind of draw inspiration from for the color red, is there any particular fruits or anything else that just kind of screams at you, like, use me in a syrup, put me in this cocktail in some form? I know a couple of them I've tried in the past, but coming from the pastry world, I'm sure you have quite a few more.
So I think what's been done a lot are, I know beets are a thing that I've been seeing a lot, both in coffee and in cocktails. Hibiscus tea was also mentioned in your Facebook group as something people have tried. Dragon fruit is something that I would give a shot. There's dragon fruit that has the white insides, and then there's dragon fruit that has the red. And if you want to kind of feel them out and see what suppliers you have different kinds, just crack them open, chop them into pieces, boil them in a simple syrup, see what color you get. You can leave it in there for, boil it, shut it off, leave it in there for 15 minutes, leave it in for 4 to 6 hours, strain it, see what kind of colors you get. It is a little fruity flavored. Unfortunately, a lot of these natural colors don't give completely neutral flavors. In order to get a truly neutral, natural color, you're going to have to get it processed a little bit by a company that can do that for you molecularly. Okay.
And then the red dragon fruit, I've never heard of that before. I've seen the white. The white's pretty, I guess, more common than the red.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to have to go and take a look for some of that stuff. That sounds really cool. Now, does it have a different kind of flavor profile than the regular white dragon fruit, or is it pretty similar?
It's similar. They vary in size. So in order for me to find the right kind of dragon fruit, I go to Asian markets. Okay. Because they're more prevalent there than as far as I found in, Western supermarkets. And so the smaller they are, the more tart and tangy they will be, which has been my experience, but also the more concentrated the color. So it's a toss-up, just kind of experiment to see which one you're looking for, because depending on how long you let that fruit sit in the syrup, you can get a very nice lightish red, not pink, lightish red, if you know what I mean, or a really deep berry, jewel tone. So it's all a matter of, playing around with it, proportions, time.
Perfect. Excellent. Now, one of the other things that we tend to use behind the bar, as far as ingredients to kind of show off and showcase that color red, are some dehydrated garnishes. So like a dehydrated strawberry or like cherry slices or something like that. Have you had any experience with dehydrated garnishes that might really pop with that color red? It sounds like the dragon fruit might be a really great choice for that.
Yeah, just give that a shot, especially because it does deepen so much in color when you start, taking it out of its fresh stage.
Hmm.
Something else that isn't red but looks good, I've found, is a blood orange.
Oh yeah.
Because as it dries, or I've used it candied in different applications, it does lose some of its orange tinge, then it kind of hedges into the red.
Now, candied fruit is one of my favorite things in the world to do. I love it. Can you talk a little bit about the process and kind of the end result of what you get if you candy a zest?
Sure. So the way that I do it is you just put your zest or your fruit in a pot of half water, half sugar,
Hmm.
and then let it boil. How hard you want it, the rind or the fruit to be at the end, really depends on how long you let it boil. So if you want to get really precise with it, you can get a candy thermometer and go to,
Hmm.
they call it softball, or you can just kind of swirl it around and look at it. Pull it out of the syrup when it's to your liking, toss it around in some, I do super fine granulated cane sugar, so it gets that kind of crystallized, crunchy texture
Hmm.
and look to it, and then it's good to go.
Oh, excellent. And then you could probably just store that in a Ziploc bag with a little desiccant powder or something like that.
Yeah,
Uh,
you just don't want to let it stick together and get moist again. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. And I think that's a really great point, especially when we start to use some of these ingredients in cocktails. You know, one of the big movements now is kind of sustainability or zero waste. So if you're using blood oranges in a cocktail or, other citrus, you can save the rinds, process it in other ways, and potentially make a really cool garnish out of it too without having to throw it away and using a fresh piece of fruit just for the garnish or something like that. So that's a really cool technique. And I bet you could do like different shapes with the zest and all that stuff to really kind of present a really cool garnish for the end cocktail.
And you can use the sugar syrup solution that you use to cook the fruit in also, which is what I did a dessert a couple of months ago that was just a real simple, like blood orange tiramisu kind of a deal.
Hmm.
Candied the slices for the garnish in the top, and then made everybody cream sodas out of the syrup that was left over. So, don't want
That's
anything go to
awesome.
waste.
That sounds so good.
It was very refreshing.
I bet it was. It sounds delicious. And yeah, one of the other areas that we've done in the past was sugar and salt, dehydrated like crystals, basically. Now, I wonder if you were going to do that with the blood orange, would it be the same process? You would candy the zest and then dry it out and then puree it down, or would there be a better kind of way of making a dehydrated, like a flavored salt with the color red in it?
Um, so that's what I would do probably to start with,
Hmm.
just as a starting point application. I'm a fan of this. Either I'm a person of extremes, so I either like the really super fine sugar or
Hmm.
the more textured. So if you're going to go super fine, to get a slightly more visually dramatic look for your color,
Hmm.
and might sound a little bit weird, is you'd add a kind of couple of drops of vinegar. I just use white vinegar. I know, right?
Really?
And then a drop of whatever color you're looking for, and then shake that bag. And as long as you don't overdo the vinegar, it's not going to affect your flavor. But
Hmm.
I don't know, when you dye Easter eggs, you put vinegar in with the color.
Makes
Same
sense.
thing. Yep.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Vinegar. I'm gonna have to remember that one then. That's really cool.
Just a little bit.
And yeah, and you said it just kind of makes that color just pop a little bit more.
And
Um,
it also helps it, adhere and mix up and such like that. So.
Perfect. And so, like, if you did like a dehydrated salt or a sugar with a flavor in it, add a couple, like one or two drops of food coloring, and then a couple, maybe a drop or so of vinegar, a couple drops of vinegar, and just blend it up and dry it out.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, you can really play around with it. It also depends on if you are using like a liquid to incorporate that color and flavor, or if you're using a dried pigment. There
Hmm.
are dried natural pigments you can get. Those do have very strong flavors. There are a couple of companies out there that do things like, Oh, let's see. A black carrot, which doesn't sound very red, but it's called the nebula because it's so black, but what comes out of it is red juice.
Okay.
So, if you add that to, a salt or sugar, you're going to get this earthy flavor to it. So you're going to have to be careful of what application put it to, because you're going to end up inevitably with a slightly, root vegetably overtone.
No, absolutely. And this is all, variables that we could play with too, so if you have something that is a little bit on the earthy side and a little bit maybe on the sweet earthy side and maybe a hint of spice, this might be a really great ingredient to have in your back pocket. Say, okay, I'm going to do this on a rim. You can go sweet or savory depending on your application, and kind of go from there. Now, I've never heard of dried pigments. That's pretty cool. Now, is this something that is kind of a secret in the pastry world?
I wouldn't say it's a secret. It's
Uh-huh.
actually comes out of the superfood movement, where everyone says, the higher color concentrate in your vegetables and fruits, the healthier they are for you, antioxidants, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So companies have really kind of taken off with that, and it's fascinating. You can get really, really intense colors out of what looks like a protein powder in a bag,
Right.
but is, just these condensed minerals and et cetera. And it's, again, very concentrated flavors, but the
Sure.
colors just, you can get a brilliant green or a brilliant blue. It's amazing.
So, if I were to look this up, do you have a company that you tend to kind of gravitate towards? Because this sounds like a pretty amazing ingredient that we could incorporate behind the bar that I don't feel like a lot of people have even come up on a radar yet.
So I came across the black carrot from a
Mm-hmm.
company called Naturally Colorful. They do naturally germinate I guess, is that the correct word? Basically, it's a GMO, but it's not a chemical GMO. They're breeding them together old fashioned, if that makes
Got
any
it. Okay,
sense.
yeah, yeah. So
Um,
they're hybrids, or they're bred
there you
to
go.
exaggerate the colors, very much like we've been doing for thousands of years, basically.
Yes.
Got
Yeah,
it.
that would be a
Okay.
better way to put it. So that's how they're able to get as dark and sharp pigments as they get, because
Mm-hmm.
they're constantly working on proprietary seeds and such that'll create exactly what they're looking for. Some of their varietals are actually either patented or patent pending, so you can't just go out and buy, seeds that would give you the same level of, color.
Intensity and color and all
Yep.
that. Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's smart. It's an investment for them,
oh,
right?
absolutely, especially because it kind of scratches two itches. It's, it's healthy and it's beautiful. So
Mm-hmm.
why wouldn't you want to, play around with that?
Absolutely.
I've used it in smoothies,
Mm-hmm.
also, because they're relatively stable when it comes to mixing them with other things.
Sure.
They're not, huge, like you couldn't take it to a very wide range of temperatures, but manipulating it doesn't change its property
Okay.
as much
So,
as like a puree might do.
right, exactly. So the color won't fade drastically in like 15 minutes, or, if you go past a boil on it or something like that, it's not going to like completely oxidize it and turn it brown or black or anything. So it
Mm-hmm.
sounds like a pretty fun and interesting ingredient to work with for colors and textures, and really interesting flavors as well.
So there is one other product that I haven't played with, but I've been told a lot about.
Mm-hmm.
And I sent out for a sample of it actually a little bit ago. So we'll see what happens when it comes in.
Okay.
So avocado pits and skins have been used for reddish kind of dyes for clothing for
Mm-hmm.
a very long time. And a company has sort of engineered that to be available as a food colorant.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very interesting because they say it's water soluble and also is not at all affected by pH, temperature, light, oxygen, all those other things that would affect any other natural pigment.
Right.
They also say there's no taste or aroma, which is
Really?
exactly what really made me decide, okay, I'm going to press send and give me a sample of this.
Sure.
It's called Avo Color. And they show on their website, it shows, I mean, a very large range of, from its beautiful kind of, light yellow to a orangish, reddish color. I mean, it's very interesting. I can't wait till it gets here, actually.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. Like in California, we have the no plastic straw rule
Yes.
in restaurants. I'm sure everybody's heard about it. And we were at a restaurant the other day, and they had a straw that was made out of avocado pit. And I was like, how is that even possible? But I mean, the power of avocado, man, I love it.
I'll have to take a look at that because that sounds amazing.
Yeah, and it was great. Like with the paper straws, we've had more than our fair share of experience with that out here. They just get soggy and they're kind of gross, and they're not a really great drinking experience.
Yeah, papery.
It's just gross. Yeah, and so we've been kind of itching to get something that's a little bit more high quality, and we've had quite a few different types of straws come out that have been really good. But this one was great. Didn't break down. You didn't get that kind of soggy factor. I think they had like a wax on it or something. So it didn't degrade over time. It was great and then neutral as far as flavor goes. So it was pretty interesting. But, avocados, I never would have thought about that with the color though. That's because you just see it and it's like, doesn't look like much.
Yeah, it doesn't look like... when someone had mentioned this to me, I just sit and think about it, and I thought, sometimes when you get them and you take the pit out, there's that sort of reddish tinge to the hollowed out area, and I'm okay, yeah, that's actually, yep, okay.
Yeah, no, now that you mention it, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. So those are some great things I'm going to have to look up. So it sounds like Avo Color is a company, and then the other one was Naturally Colorful.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. That's really cool, and I'm really excited about trying some of these, especially the naturally colorful, and seeing how they can be incorporated in cocktails. I think that could be a lot of fun. Now, one of the last ingredients I'll kind of pick your brain on here,
okay,
is foams. I think this is a little bit more kind of an advanced cocktail technique. You're not going to see this in like your neighborhood bar, but a lot of craft cocktails places have been experimenting with foam and incorporating it into the bar program. Is there any kind of advice you would give them, any kind of ingredients you would kind of push them towards or away from when working with like maybe a red foam or a colored foam?
So when we do foam, or I do foam, a lot of it's about texture and then the ingredients that go into it. So like in the mid 2000s, people were on the goat foam train for goat cheese. So we sort of run the gamut. It would really be about the texture of the foam that you're looking for. There are many different, I guess the technical term is surfactant, but I mean the binder that makes the foam. Gelatin is used quite a bit. Agar, lecithin. They're now starting to come out with synthetic surfactants, which are like proteins that are being manipulated around so that you can sort of play with, what texture you're going to get based on what you're actually trying to foam. Sure. Whether you're going to do it like in a whipped cream canister, or how you're going to make that foam work for you. So it's kind of fun to play around with and see because technology is really pushing things forward in a very interesting way. Yeah,
absolutely. And it seems like food science in general, I mean, the Avo Color is a great example of that, of like, okay, let's think creatively around this and find other ingredients and stuff. And I think to your point about the protein manipulation and structure and all that stuff, it's amazing all the new products that I constantly see in like that modernist kind of molecular movement. That all have very specific applications. If you want small bubbles or large bubbles, or then you grab different different ingredients, and spherification is a whole different animal. It's like
Yep, exactly. There's so much crossover and so many different fields and avenues. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, how much fun is this stuff? Just being able to know that I could potentially play with this kind of stuff and incorporate this into some fun stuff.
So in the Facebook group, there was someone who asked about blue pigment and trying to get the color to stay true, but without manipulating, add a lemon or add a lime, and all of a sudden you've got teal or pink or purple or whatever
yeah.
you'd get. So actually, I have two chemist friends that I discussed this with the last couple of days. I wish
Thank you, by the way.
you
have no idea how excited I am to hear these answers.
So we hypothetically, again, this is a theory. I haven't tried it. I'm sure people could do a test and then report back. So if you balance the pH of the initial liquid you were looking to use, potentially, then you could add that color and then keep kind of play with the proportions and keep it from making that color change. So what I had proposed, like the example, I said, well, what about a lemonade? Because both like the sourness, the acidity, so both the flavor and the acidity are so important to the lemonade. So we don't want to like nudge it over out of its acidity to alkaline, so you lose those properties.
Right.
But say you wanted to make it blue, how would you just keep it that way? And so if we were to ever test this in any time further, we would just start messing around with because you can buy alkaline water. You can buy drops.
Yeah.
Some health places have actual ionizers that are, $5,000, but you can get water straight from the tap there. So, I mean, it's just something to just mess around with when you have time. I plan on doing so with them.
Yeah. What's funny is I experimented with butterfly tea. It must have been 5 years ago. And the thing that I found, and this does not cross over to drinks at all, but baking soda. Since it's so alkaline, you add a little bit here, add a little bit there, and it kind of pushes the color. But man, does it really impact the flavor? You don't want to drink it, But to your point, the alkaline water could be a great place to start with just your simple syrups. So instead of doing a tap water simple syrup, with a 5 pH or 5.5 pH, whatever it is, start off on the alkaline side, you have a lot more of a pH range to play with. So that could be really cool. And definitely something to try. So that is really interesting. And I never heard of an ionizer before. So there's one thing that we love to do in this industry, and that's buy really expensive toys. There's quite a few bars that have, I can't remember what they're called, basically just a vacuum distiller.
Sure.
And they rotovapes. They actually invest in rotovapes, and I'm like, how is this profitable? But it's a thing. So having another piece of technology to investigate and potentially try and convince your boss to buy.
I mean, they're amazing. They're very interesting things to work with.
Yeah, cool, awesome. Well, I'm gonna have to look into that too. Very cool. Now that is really interesting because, like I said, blue is such a hard color to nail naturally. There's not a lot of options out there. I think, we talked a little bit about it. I think cabbage was one of them. And even like young garlic, I think has kind of a blue pigment to it potentially. But other than that, I mean, there's not much else out there that really kind of hammers, really nails that blue color. So, I think we'll keep experimenting. Hopefully the ionizer and maybe like a pH buffer solution or something like that could really help kind of just keep that color in that spectrum. Pretty cool. So now that is there any other ingredients that you would really recommend people take a look at if they're looking for even like dyes that you use? I know adding dyes to craft cocktails isn't really widely accepted. People don't really like that avenue, but is there any dye companies that you really like to work with on a pastry side that you have a lot of experience with or would steer people towards?
To be perfectly honest, for beverages, I would say, like you said, stay away from them because they are very, very detectable in certain applications. And I would myself personally prefer it to be I can taste dye in things. Maybe it's because I've been, playing with food for a long time, but I just prefer the natural. In pastry, we use, gel. Oh, I use gel dye for, say, icings and stuff. There are specific colors that we use for chocolate because they have to incorporate with the the cocoa butter. But I mean, yeah, I would say stick as close as you can to natural. Again, I understand that it's kind of a bummer when you want to have a drink look one way, but you don't want the flavor. Unfortunately, that you're for right now, you're kind of limited in that. But I
Sure.
think that the outcome overall is superior than just sticking a drop of food coloring in there.
Yeah, it's definitely a handicap, right? It's like the lazy man way of coloring, especially when you have such great options out there that are natural, and that I think most of us would probably agree with that as well. But I'm sure, if there's just that one color you want to nail and you don't have another choice, then maybe like be very sparing with it in a vast quantity of liquid.
Oh yeah, I mean, like we stick a toothpick or a skewer inside the container and then drag it through whatever it is we're trying to color, just so that it's just minuscule amounts, because once you get too much in there, you can't get rid of it. So
right, okay, so maybe that might be an option, is like basically just put it in the same room as your like simple syrup or vodka or something like that, and just let them, maybe get to know each other a little bit, but that's about it.
You gotta wave as you pass, yeah.
Right, yeah, exactly. So we talked about ingredients. We talked about some techniques that you would recommend people go and try. Now, is there any ingredients, or maybe not ingredients, but are there any colors you would tell people not to really incorporate with the color red? Because I know color wheel and all that stuff, complementary colors, I'm not very good at it. I can barely dress myself in the morning. But somebody that does plating for a living, and, this is probably one of the considerations you guys have when coming up with, eye-catching desserts and stuff. Is there any colors you would recommend people kind of look at as far as complementary colors, and any ones to kind of stay away from?
In my opinion, anything that could accidentally turn into a muddy brown is something we'd want to avoid. So any of the primary colors mixed together, so red, yellow, blue, if you get them a little too close to each other, then they start swirling into this weird brownish. They can be very beautiful shades of brown, but generally probably not what you're looking for when you're spending all this time and energy on these beautiful pigments.
Right.
So I mean, you can play with density in different syrups and stuff like that to try to get them to like float on top of each other or not mix. But I mean, you're going to run the risk if you try to put those together, kind of making a little puddle.
A beautiful shade of brown.
A beautiful shade of brown, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, that's just good advice right there. So it sounds, avoid other primary colors is kind of the take home of this. Like look in that same spectrum of like oranges maybe, and reds and red tones.
Yeah.
To kind of keep it as close to red as possible, or even like a neutral color like a sparkling wine, for example, or a clear base spirit.
Yes.
Just to kind of preserve the intensity of that color. Okay, that sounds good. There was another question I was going to ask you, and it totally escaped me. I don't think I put this in our questions, but when you think of the color red, what are some of the flavors that you naturally think of? Like, if you wanted to reinforce the color red through flavor, what would be some of the flavors that you really kind of gravitate towards?
Tart and tangy, berries, strawberries. There's, the lesser, I think, kind of, things that would come to my mind would be like, say, a dried cranberry that's, still got that tanginess and the sweetness, but it's more subdued, kind of mixing towards, into a different flavor sort of profile altogether, but just sort of on that edge. Sweet, obviously, for its fruitiness. You can, I would say that those are probably the most, the ones that would stand out and represent that color the most.
And then on the spice side, if you wanted to incorporate some spice that kind of, had that kind of red feel to it, is there something that you would kind of gravitate towards in that area? I know cinnamon is kind of that natural one of like, red hots and stuff like that. It's just kind of imprinted in people's brains that they go together. Is there any other spices that you would recommend people like taking a look at as far as like really embodying kind of red, if that makes sense? I know this is probably a terrible question.
Oh no, it's all good. So ground chili is something that I like to kind of play around with. Obviously in very sparing amounts, but and cayenne as well. Again, it's very sparing amounts. At the coffee shop, we have a drink that is a ginger turmeric simple syrup that has the cayenne mixed in there. So when you mix it all together and make a beverage out of it, it's got these nice sort of red speckles distributed throughout. So just this little pop of color and a strength of flavor. So, just there's a lot of options. Just kind of got to try them.
Yeah, no, that's great. I know the chili thing didn't even come to mind on that one. But that's really cool. That's great advice. And I think that's all the questions we had. And you've mentioned the Facebook group a couple of times, and which you're a member of, and I can't believe that because we have a honest to goodness pastry chef in our Craft Cocktail Club Facebook group. But anybody else listening, if you haven't joined, highly recommend it. There's some great conversations, a lot of cocktail pictures, which is kind of fun. And it's pretty great community. So if you haven't had the opportunity, definitely go check that out. I think you can find it on barabove.com/groups. Find a couple links there, one for the professional group of bartenders and one for kind of everybody. So definitely go check that out. Now, Bella, is there anything that you would like to promote? Any platforms that you really gravitate towards on social media or anything like that?
No, actually, I just I'm kind of old-fashioned and stuff, and I just sort of skate through, picking and choosing what I'm going to look at. I do love your group a lot. I'm getting a lot of information and ideas from you. So thank you. I appreciate that. So, if anybody has any questions, they can just go through you and I'll do my best to answer them.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for your time. I think we got you mid-shift between gigs. So I know how hard the restaurant life is, and I appreciate the time and especially your expertise. So thank you again.
Of course. Thank you.
Yeah. So thanks again to Chef Bella for her time, her experience, and all her recommendations on ingredients. We definitely appreciate it. And you may have heard her reference the Craft Cocktail Club a couple of times in the interview. She's actually a member in the group, and we're very lucky and honored to have her there. So if you haven't joined the group, I highly recommend doing so. We actually have two. One that is bartender focused, really industry heavy, and one for basically everybody that loves cocktails. Everyone's welcome in that group, actually both groups. And if you want to join, check them out over at barabove.com/groups. So we'll have another podcast on this subject as well, and I highly recommend checking that one out. Also, different chef, different perspective, and a lot of similarities as well, but it's really good. I highly recommend it. So definitely check out episode number 172 as well.